One, two, three, go. All righty. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. And on the program, in our All Things Canada edition, we welcome back our returning champion, Barry Weisleder, who is part of Socialist Action Canada, the NDP Socialist Caucus, and the Workers' Alliance Movement, which is trying to wham it to the bosses and to the union misleadership class. And
Yeah,
let's get started. First off, Barry, thank you so much for coming back on the program.
my pleasure, and thank you for doing this for all these years. And it's always great to speak with you.
Likewise, Barry. I completely feel the exact same way with the work that you and your team do. And alrighty, let's get underway. My first question, Barry, and let's not spend too much time on this. My first question is, can you briefly, if possible, give your thoughts on the legacy of Brian Mulroney, former Prime Minister of once mighty and second dominant party, the center-right Progressive Conservatives, and just tell me what bothered you about the corporate media and state media's coverage of his legacy. And I'm curious more particularly the NDP's response when they were lionizing him, calling him a good friend of the environment, and one of the last true compassionate conservatives, progressive conservatives. So I'm curious your response.
Yeah, well, first of all, this can't be done briefly without doing a severe injustice to the historical record, because the corporate media is rewriting history, right here and now. And that's what their response to the demise of Brian Mulroney has been all about: rewriting history and presenting him as a great statesman par excellence, which is utter nonsense. I wrote a lengthy article about this, which is published in Red Review. This is what Red Review looks like.
Fantastic!
It's
and actually, yeah,
it's number 8. It's number 8. It's the early spring edition. So I'm going to read some excerpts from the piece. And believe you me, this is just a few short excerpts, although it won't seem that way, because I think it's important. If we don't understand history, we're bound to repeat it in the worst ways.
Yeah.
So I come back to when Brian Mulroney was Prime Minister in 1984. He spoke to the elite economic club in New York and declared that Canada is open for business. Where have you heard that expression before? The slogan translated into a trade deal, first with the United States and then with Mexico, which deregulated investment and saw hundreds of thousands of well-paid jobs move to low-wage zones around the world. This hit auto workers particularly hard as U.S. plants migrated to Mexico, where democratic unions face violent repression. It was the advent of the neoliberal globalization period, co-authored by President Ronald Reagan, who Brian Mulroney serenaded at the 1985 Quebec summit, and Britain's Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. The result is palpable. Before the North American Trade Agreement, manufacturing constituted 20% of Canada's GDP. Today, it's only 10%. While CEO salaries and benefits shot up, workers' wages have stagnated and young workers face increasingly precarious employment. According to the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, the richest CEOs are paid 246 times more than the average worker. With the Foreign Investment Review Agency of the Liberal government gone, Mulroney found it easier to privatize Air Canada, Canadian National Railways, and Petro-Canada, as well as the famous Connaught Laboratories, the publicly owned pharmaceutical company that might have produced the needed vaccine during the COVID virus. Of course, Stephen Harper trumped Mulroney. That's intentional use of the word. When Harper sold the Canadian Wheat Board to foreign companies, and Pierre Poilievre threatens to defund the CBC if he forms the government. Just a month after Nelson Mandela visited Mulroney in June 1990, Mulroney authorized the deployment of 4,500 combat troops to counter Mohawk resistance to a golf course and condominium development on Indigenous ancestral burial ground near Oka, Quebec. This assault normalized subsequent military and police response to land defenders and water protectors, even as Ottawa adopted reconciliation as official government policy. Now, fast forward, as a staunch federalist and a fierce opponent of national liberation, Mulroney aimed to liquidate the national question in Canada, in the Canadian state, once and for all. After the fiasco of the Meech Lake Accord, which was rightly derogated as a dirty backroom deal, he tried again with the Charlottetown Accord. It failed to meet Quebec's minimum standards for sovereignty. It did not entrench women's rights, and it fell short of Indigenous people's aspirations. At the same time, it weakened the capacity of the federal government to satisfy social needs across English Canada. In short, the Charlottetown Accord would have furthered economic decentralization and deregulation without freeing oppressed nations. So I'm happy that the accord went down to defeat in a referendum on October 26, 1992, with 54.3% voting no. In Quebec, the result was 57% no. A majority of Indigenous people said no too. Mulroney, who famously rolled the dice, that was one of his favorite expressions, let's roll the dice, he was utterly humiliated. His profound failure at statecraft sparked the rise of the Bloc Québécois and the Reactionary Reform Party, leading to today's Conservative Party under Poilievre. The disintegration of the ruling class consensus was an unintended consequence of Mulroney's monumental hubris. Justin Trudeau's absurd claim that Mulroney created a, quote, modern, dynamic, and prosperous Canada, close quote, is just ludicrous bombast, truly worthy of an admirer of the life of Brian.
Next question.
And you asked about the NDP. Unfortunately, the NDP joined in the chorus of accolades for Brian Mulroney. Not as full-throatedly, but nonetheless they did. It's shameful.
Yes, Ed Broadbent also passed away last year, and he yes, and if people want to know Ed Broadbent's legacy, people should check out Barry's first interview with us, where we looked critically at all of the federal leaders of the NDP, and that's a perfect segue to this question, which is, I wanted your opinions. Can you assess this? I believe she's the mayor of Toronto, Olivia Chow. Why did so many left-leaning folks and leftists back her? And how do you think she's faring? And also, she's not a member of the NDP, is she, or is she independent? Or
she is an individual member of the NDP, unless she's terminated her membership. I don't know. When what's his name? The previous mayor, like 15 years prior, David Miller, was elected as an independent to mayor of Toronto. He publicly terminated his membership in the NDP. So the real question is, why did some progressives support Olivia Chow, including some radical leftists who really should know better? I'm not going to name names.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
it was really indicative of their shortcomings. Well, there is not a strong tradition of party politics at the municipal level. It's not to say that it does not exist. It does in Montreal and Vancouver and Edmonton and Winnipeg. There are generations of parties, but they're often not the same parties as the federal or provincial parties. They're municipal parties, which means they're not accountable to any other structure. And in the case of NDP, they're not accountable to the labor movement. They're not accountable to the process of policymaking in the NDP, which leaves a lot to be desired, absolutely. However, it's better than nothing at all. And what we saw is that Olivia ran as an independent, although she was well known as a former NDP member of Parliament, as a city councillor who ran without affiliation. But I guess it's a function of at least two or three factors. One, a low class consciousness. that people don't recognize, as they do in Europe, for example, and most of the other continents. They don't recognize that all politics is class-based, and that if you're running for mayor or city council or school board or the European Parliament or your own national assembly, you have to demonstrate your program through affiliation to a major existing party. And if there's parties that are based on the working class movement, then so much the better, even though these parties are often in conflict with their social base. But in Canada, it's a weaker identification. Plus, the NDP, which is led by pro capitalist manipulators of the worst kind, don't want to be held accountable to anybody. So they favor these independent candidacies, which don't have to be nominated by or enjoy the organized support of an assembly which sets the policy and chooses the candidate. Instead, they run for the opinion polls, and if the polls show that they have high name recognition and they're not vilified massively in the public square, then they can run as independents. And the NDP prefers that because then there is no structure at the local level that can be potentially more radical than the provincial or federal NDP, which is setting a low bar. But and for example, there was an NDP for decades and decades running municipally in Vancouver, but the provincial NDP dissolved it. Why? Because the Vancouver NDP was much more radical than its provincial sister, and they didn't want to have to put up with this conflict. In other words, they didn't want to have to put up with a more working class agenda. The Vancouver-based NDP was far from perfect, but it was a hell of a lot better than Dave Barrett's BC government, or even the current government, which welcomes cops and gas and oil pipelines across Indigenous territory to the Pacific coast, where it can do an enormous amount of damage to the ecosystem. So that's why Olivia ran as an independent, why the NDP leaders were happy with that, and many progressives got sucked into it. Socialist Action, which is part of the Municipal Socialist Alliance, MSA, we ran a candidate in the special by-election for mayor, and that was Kiri Vadavelu. Earlier, half a year earlier, we ran 10 candidates across Southern Ontario, half of them in the Toronto area, for city councils. And we got a vote, anywhere from 3% to 35, 40%. One of our candidates for school board in Ottawa achieved that. And our effort is to try to establish, not saying it'll be easy, establish class-oriented politics at all levels, including the municipal level, where the NDP does not run. So we're not running against the NDP by running socialist candidates locally. And we intend to continue doing that and either force them to be accountable and run locally on a socialist platform, or step aside and let the socialists do what needs to be done.
And what's your assessment of her? I don't know how many days she's been mayor now, but what's your assessment of her governance so far?
Our assessment of her record is that it's poor. She has acted, well, I was going to say counterintuitively, but no, unfortunately, those who know Olivia and who know the NDP and its track record and the history of so-called independent left politics at the municipal level would not and should not be surprised. She made a deal with the provincial government to get some money for housing, not even nearly enough. And of course, that money is going to be fed to profit-hungry land developers and construction corporations, rather than the city getting into the business of building housing. The federal government got into the business of building housing, Regent Park and many other large housing programs right after World War II. Why? Because the troops came home and found they couldn't afford to find a place to live. And they were armed. No, not when they disembarked. They were not armed. But, the government couldn't suffer that indignity doing nothing for those who they say defended democracy. That was their caption. So they showed that the state can build homes. Of course, this is very well known in Britain, and maybe, I don't know about other countries. You can say about Belgium and Netherlands and Northern and Central and Western Europe, but it's a well-established fact that governments build housing. But no, not Olivia. And one of the very first things she did in office when the genocide against Gaza was launched by the Zionist apartheid state was she demanded that the police not allow any pro-Palestinian demonstrations in the street. That was one of the first things she did. She had to back off that position because we had thousands and like tens of thousands of people in the streets. Even 2 days ago, we had close to 1,000 people demanding free all the Palestinian political prisoners, marching from Bay and Front near the old Union Station up to City Hall and beyond to Dundas Square. A lot of the people watching this won't know what I'm talking about, but
No, no,
that's
no, no.
right.
I think they do. I mean, we've had I'm blanking on who were some of my most recent guests, but did have Eve on just before the year ended,
Yeah,
and he
yeah.
was saying that these are unprecedented demonstrations. He does believe that these are arguably the biggest mass demonstrations against imperialism and specifically on the topic of Palestine since the huge, unprecedented demonstrations against Iraq before the invasion. So,
Yes, and I go back to pretty fresh memories of the movement against the war in Vietnam. It took 10 years to build up to demonstrations of hundreds of thousands and millions in the United States. This movement is only 6 months old. And the horror of the for the people of Gaza is like unfathomable to most of us. So I'm not wishing a longer term, but I'm saying that the movement gathered strength so rapidly, and not just because of the internet and instant communications, which is the leitmotif of our times, but because of the savagery with which the Zionist regime has carried out this assault on the people of Gaza, displacing over 1.5 million, and now heading into Rafah at the southern tip of Gaza with a ground war. The bombardment has already occurred. And let's not forget the West Bank,
yes,
because
of course.
over 300 people have been killed on the West Bank by armed fanatical settlers uh, backed by the IDF, in the streets of the West Bank, which has suffered immensely, for decades and decades. So that's Olivia Chow should be ashamed for calling on the police to terminate demonstrations. It's an article of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. But not only that, she presented a budget to City Council, and it was a budget that called for a municipal property tax increase of almost 11%. She had to scale it down, but the double-digit increase was something she presented just to raise the flag and see which way the wind is blowing. But nonetheless, there's a big property tax increase of over 9%, and the police budget not only was maintained, but the police demanded an additional $12 million, and Olivia gave it to them, no questions asked. So that's another example. She's failed on housing. She's failed on the police. And I gotta show you this.
Yeah,
A very nice man
yeah,
by the name of Umar Zamir. He and his young family on Canada Day were going to retrieve their car at Toronto City Hall underground parking. And as they began to move out of their parking spot, they were accosted by three individuals in plain clothes. And the individuals were banging on the car, on its windows, and on the trunk. They said, "Stop! Come on out!" And they thought that they were going to be carjacked. They thought they faced robbery or death. So they didn't. They backed out of the spot, and in the process, unintentionally, they bumped one of the three cops who fell down. And then when they, straightened out and proceeded to leave the garage, they traveled over what they thought was a speed bump, but it was actually the cop, a 300-pound cop, and they had no idea. They had no idea that they were traveling over a body. And the police did not identify themselves, and they were in plain clothes. And of course, there's always a fear of young families of being accosted and attacked and robbed or killed. So they were charged with first-degree murder.
The family
And
for
the, the,
accidentally
the
running
driver,
over.
the driver was charged with first-degree murder, even though he didn't know that these were cops. And even though he couldn't see the cop when they hit what he thought was a speed bump on the concourse of the underground parking. But three cops concocted a story that the big cop who died was right in front of the car, and that the driver, this man, deliberately ran him down and killed him deliberately. Well, after 3 years and a jury trial, he was completely vindicated. And what we learned from this, if we didn't, many of us already know it, the police lie. They lie systematically. Whenever the stakes are big, a lie is in the works. And the jury simply wouldn't fall for the police lies. And there were other people who forensic scientists who examined the route and the conditions of the underground parking and so on, and said it's impossible that they saw him, and it's impossible that they knowingly killed him. This was a tragic accident. So the jury agreed, but the police lied. And this is who Olivia Chow is supporting. No questions asked.
That's a perfect segue, actually. That's a perfect segue to the election of the NDP. The NDP is in control of Manitoba. Wab Kinew, first Indigenous premier, I believe, of of any province, I would say. And I wanted your assessment of him because, speaking of the police, I was a bit surprised because Wab Kinew had a bit of a of an Indigenous left wing street credits. And I was just a bit shocked that, for a person of his background, that when looking at, like, his platform, there's no defunding of the police. Actually, there's more funding of the police. His community control over the police is not at all like what the late great Glenn Ford was advocating. And then his mental health plan, his mental health care plan is not merging mental health care into Canada's quasi single payer system. It's just, I would say, it's subsidizing the already powerful private mental health care industry, and just subsidizing that as, and yeah, and so I just wanted your reflections on that, and his response also to what's going on in Palestine. For many people, broke their hearts.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I agree with your assessment. I don't have a lot to add to it, except that the Manitoba NDP government and the British Columbia NDP provincial government, and there was an NDP government decades before in British Columbia, before there was one in Manitoba. And there was an Ontario NDP government under Bob Rae. That was a horror story.
Wow,
And there
yeah.
was an NDP government in Nova Scotia at one time, and in the Yukon Territory. But anyway, the NDP has been in government in at least close to half the provinces and territories. But that being said, Wab Kinew does not tax the corporate rich. There's no radical tax reform that he offers, and that means he's limited in what he can do. You can't print money provincially. Not that that would be a solution, because it would provoke hyperinflation. But the provincial government is limited to certain provincial share of the income tax and some sales taxes if they wish. Not in Alberta. No, they're the land of the home and the brave, the not so brave, and the free. Texas North, we like to say. But Wab Kinew is not trying to break down the citadel of capitalist rule in his province. He has a pleasant smile. He's a nice fellow by all accounts. He used to work for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. He was a reporter.
Yeah, that's how
Um,
that's how I was aware of him. I even have a copy of his DVD series Eighth Fire about the plight of Indigenous people.
yeah, yeah. So, of course, I have nothing against any of these folks on a personal level. Not even Mulroney, not even Ed Broadbent or Wab Kinew or it's just that their politics are fucked up. They're totally they're tools of the capitalist order, and they should not be supported, regardless of other considerations of a personality kind and so on. So Wab Kinew is really limited in what he can do. He participates in federal programs. He's calling into question the carbon tax, and we can talk about that more if you want. The other provinces are opposing the carbon tax for right-wing populist reasons. I hope Wab's approach is more on the progressive side. In other words, to demand, tax the polluters, not the consumers. That's our position. And actually, Jagmeet Singh is coming around to that position. We can talk more about that. But
But
I don't have a detailed critique of Wab Kinew. And the BC NDP government is pretty rank. It's done some good things on the housing front to provide a little bit more affordable housing, but it hasn't taxed big money, and it has facilitated gas and oil pipelines across Indigenous territories. It's not high on the list of the eco-socialist firebrands of our day that we need to see more.
Very briefly, one of these days we're going to have to talk all about Alberta. I have tried, but yeah, I just wanted, very briefly, what do you think is going to happen with the Alberta NDP leadership race? Rachel Notley is finally
Yeah.
stepping down, but right now Alberta, once again, right-wing terror is still reigning on that province with the ghastly UCP party of Danielle Smith, who particularly is attacking the 2S LGBTQIA plus community, and
Yeah.
yeah. So I just wanted a response on on the
Well,
leadership.
the Alberta NDP will is better off with the retirement. Is it right term of
One
the
can only
former
hope.
leader Notley. Uh, but you know, I think leading the pack. I'm not sure. I haven't seen the latest stats. I really didn't prepare to talk much about Alberta. I have to confess.
No problem.
Um, leading the pack, I think, is the former mayor of Calgary, who is an independent liberal. You could say independent capital L liberal, former mayor of Calgary, and he's running for the NDP leadership on a totally opportunistic basis because there are two leading parties in Alberta, the UCP and the NDP, and he wants a share of power. So he makes no bones about it. That's what he's about. He's trying to humanize the NDP. Again, he has a nice smile, and he's a person of color from well, his family is from Asia, and that's well and good. We need more representation in government of diversity, but it's still a capitalist government, and he's trying to turn the NDP into a liberal capitalist party.
But, it's,
Rachel Notley.
but that's but that's said before we switch gears. Then isn't the NDP literally already like that, both federally and provincially?
Well, no, it's not because it is linked to the labor movement. Unions
Yeah, no,
are
but no doubt about that. I don't question that, but still, like the leadership of like the NDP, whether it's a Bruce Horgan or whether it's or Notley, they're always diet liberals. They're business friendly. They're pro war. They're pro NATO.
Yeah, but Yuri, that's also true. also true for the leaders of our unions. The largest union is the Public Service Alliance, the National Union of Provincial and Government Employees, including OPSU and BCGEU and AUPE. The steel workers, the auto worker. Well, it's the new auto workers. It's part of an amalgamated union. All of these unions are led by people who have, guess what? Worse politics, much worse politics than the NDP leaders, bar none, bar none. And in fact, it was Buzz Hargrove, when he was leader of the auto workers, who welcomed a Liberal prime minister and put a union leather jacket on his shoulders to celebrate the connection between then. It's now Unifor, but then it was the auto workers in backing the Liberal Party. The CAW under Buzz Hargrove bragged about how they found the NDP not radical enough, and we cheered a little bit inside. Oh, that sounds so good to hear. And what he did was he took the union to the right and backed the Liberals without any voice in the Liberal Party. I mean, in the NDP, there are union delegates who vote up or down on resolutions and elect leaders or defeat leaders. In the Liberal Party, it's just, thank you very much for your point of view. We welcome you into our disciplined voting bloc. So if we were to say that NDP leaders and their policy justifies describing the NDP as the same as the other parties, we commit a grave error, in my humble opinion. It's a grave error, because then you have to write off the entire labor movement, with very few exceptions, like the current president of Ontario Public Service Employees Union, J.P. Hornick, who we give critical support. But, CUPE, all on down the line, you'd have to say, well, the unions are led by pro-capitalist conservatives, therefore we're going to have nothing to do with the unions. But that would be a prescription for total and complete self-isolation. Would make no sense unless you want to be isolated. So
that's a perfect segue then for this so that's actually a perfect segue for this question, okay. Which is, do you think the Liberal Party under Trudeau will win a re-election in a general election, hypothetically? The Liberals, I'm actually quite surprised. The Liberals under Trudeau passed Pharmacare, dental care, and I know for a fact that the NDP are going to claim credit for pushing it, but I'm sure that the Liberals are going to give all the credits. And let me just actually already kind of merge this other question, which is, if the Conservatives make a political comeback, and it'll be the end of the Trudeau regime and the end of Jagmeet Singh. I'm then curious as to why hypothetically they would both lose, given that Trudeau, I think, has now become the first Liberal prime minister, in however small or big his government is, to have passed a pretty social transformative legislation of Pharmacare and dental care, something which the NDP and those of us on the left have always been advocating for in
okay. Okay, let me tackle this combination of questions, Yuri. you want to keep me busy. Okay.
Still got some time with you.
Presently,
it's only 12:37.
No, I'm not keeping an eye on the clock, but I want to try to answer all facets of your question, and I'm sure you'll remind me if I leave something out.
Yeah.
The Liberals are in trouble. According to the latest opinion polls, and I say polls in plural, because there are several that show the same results, the Liberals are 15 to 20 opinion poll percentage points behind the Conservatives. Pierre Poilievre, which is a more right-wing variant of Stephen Harper and the Tories of yesteryear, not quite Trump, but he's an admirer of Trump. Let's be candid. Has a massive lead. So can the Liberals win another minority government, much less a majority government? I'd say right now it's pretty doubtful, very doubtful.
Wow.
And that means the NDP will not be part of a um, confidence and supply agreement. Now, that's not a coalition government. That's saying, the NDP is a separate party. It maintains its political independence, but it's going to vote for every goddamn Liberal war budget. Now, I want to address the matter of Pharmacare. I'm going to quote a columnist from the Toronto Star,
Okay.
Thomas Walcom, who is a personal friend. He wrote, "The New Democrats say they brought Pharmacare to Canada. They exaggerate. The program that the Liberals came up with, and it says last week, this is some weeks ago, is at best a summary of good intentions. The Liberals say their new program will ensure that those who need contraception or who are suffering from diabetes will receive necessary drugs free of charge." So that's Pharmacare. It's not a done deal. It was just legislated, and at best, the Liberal plan for Pharmacare is setting up a Canada Drug Agency that would build a national formulary for drugs to be covered and create a national strategy for bulk purchases. Bulk purchases. Guess from whom they're purchasing in bulk? They're purchasing from the giant pharmaceutical corporations.
Yeah.
And although the government, through a bulk purchase, can negotiate with some leverage and lower the price, then the beneficiaries of this will be the pharmaceutical industry, which instead of selling to individual outlets and a markup, a greater markup, they're selling to a government, but it is a big whopping sale. It's huge. And that's instantly money. And to preserve their patent control so that people in Asia, Africa, and Latin America don't get life-saving drugs unless they can pay premium for it. Certainly, most of the governments can't afford to do it.
What would they?
And it's just two true drugs. It's diabetes and contraception, and of course that's very important. I have type 2 diabetes, and I take some pills. I don't take a mass of drugs, but I'm sensitive to this point. But it's only two kinds of treatment that will be covered, and it doesn't cover everybody. There's a test, a money test. You have to show that you're very young, very old, or very poor. So it's not universal.
Okay.
It's not universal Pharmacare. And the same is true with the dental care program. It's for the very young, the very old, or the very poor. It's not universal. And what happens to programs that are not universal? The right-wing populists attack them and say, you see, this is to benefit only a certain number of people. Why are we all being taxed to fund what people who are too lazy or too unlucky to make, their own arrangements? So that's problematic. That's why we're for universal programs. The NDP in principle is for universal programs. So why the hell are they voting for liberal budget after liberal budget after liberal budget after liberal budget to sustain a minority government? Because the budget, of course, is confidence.
I'm sure. I'm sure their argument would be that they prefer liberal opponents than conservative opponents. I remember Martin Lukash of The Breach once made a criticism about Jagmeet Singh, saying that Jagmeet Singh too often says to Justin Trudeau and the Liberal parties, you say a lot of nice things, but you don't act on them, when they should be challenging the Liberal Party as an opposition party, because the Liberal Party are
not giving them backhanded compliments.
Yeah, the Liberal Party is basically compassionate conservatism, or one nation Toryism, or what used to be called progressive conservatives, and the Conservative Party is just the pro-capitalist party. And I have my criticism of the NDP. At best, diet liberal, but at least it's a party. which, as you have said many, many times, that is where the workers' movement and other people power movements gravitate to. So
they gravitate to the NDP, but unfortunately, Justin Trudeau captured the youth vote 4 years ago, and well, not 4 years ago. I guess it was 2.5 years ago. There's going to be another election in late 2025, um, and unless the minority government falls. Well, I'm not saying that all efforts should be made to bring down the government, but the NDP should never, as a working class based party, vote for war budgets, vote for liberals. The liberals, I guess you could say, if you're very cynical, that they talk a good game, they make nice noises, but it's misleading the
well,
electorate. It's misleading the working class to say as you
the
did.
argument is that the Liberal Party. You've heard this many times, no doubt, because you live in Canada, so you're subjected to all of these talking points all the time from even the best of the left. The Liberal Party, they talk, they campaign from the left, but they govern from the right.
Well, like you, I would challenge that characterization. They don't legislate. They don't campaign from the right. They campaign from the capitalist class center, and they legislate from the right. And unfortunately, the leaders of our unions and the NDP, who are often the very same people, you got to really absorb that fact. It's often the very same union and NDP leaders, give backhanded support to liberals by saying that if only they would fulfill their promises. Well, if they fulfilled their promises, all of them, deeply, they would be no better than the most right-wing NDP government that ever appeared in a Canadian province. And that's not good enough. The world is on fire. We have forever wars raging in Central Africa, in the Middle East, in Eastern Europe, and wars on the brink in other places, ecological catastrophes. We have millions of displaced people. And then when they come to our shores, the politicians throw up their hands and say, well, we didn't have anything to do with this. Liar, liar, your pants are on fire. You had everything to do with this by being part of NATO and by supplying arms, to NATO's destruction of Yugoslavia, the bombardment of Libya, turning it into a basket case, support for the Zionist state of Israel, your pacts with the crown princes of Saudi Arabia. You are guilty as hell for ecological disaster and for massive displacement of humanity. More people have died in Sudan than are dying in Gaza. That's not to say that they're greater or lesser concern to us. They're of equal concern to us. But we have to understand the system is at fault. In the United States, the labor and the left support the Democrats. War criminal Joe Biden. They don't launch an independent Labor Party, even a party that would be as weak and craven and soft-bellied as the NDP in Canada. It would be a monumental achievement if U.S. labor would form a Labor Party even on a social democratic program, although we would fight for a revolutionary workers program. But let people fight for what they want, and the outcome will be what it is, and hopefully a democratic outcome, and the struggle continues. But we're so much farther ahead in Canada than the Americans with a liberal party, so-called a Democratic Party, which is just as bad and has prosecuted more wars of destruction than the Republicans.
But do you think that the current makeup of Ottawa, do you think that the Liberals will win a reelection with
No.
Even if people have been misled, misinformed about the new Pharmacare, dental care, which is basically just a means-tested program.
No, and I'll tell you why. I think that the Liberals are unlikely. I'm not ruling it out, of course. As my mentor Joe Flexer used to say, a prophet is a fool. So I don't make prophecies, but I'm saying all indications are that the Liberals face defeat. Although it should be added, another factor, the Tory vote is very inefficient. And by inefficient, pollsters mean that it's concentrated in one part of the country, Alberta and Western Canada generally. So they win seats there by 80, 90%, and they lose seats by 1 or 2% to Liberals in Eastern and Pacific Canada.
Yeah.
So that's a problem for the Conservatives, that their vote is inefficient. But when you have when you're 45% in the polls, 20% ahead of the Liberals, and 22% ahead of the NDP. So the NDP is catching up to the Liberals, and I hope the NDP surpasses the Liberals for all of their weaknesses and wrong-headed policies. It begs the question: why are the Conservatives doing so well? And I think you asked, and I'm going to answer that question. It's because of massive disenchantment with the establishment, with the status quo. And Pierre Poilievre is a snake, a capitalist lying snake, but he's doing his best, and he is projecting the Conservative Party as being for the working class. And he can get away with saying this to a portion of the population, the politically uneducated portion of the population, because they don't understand, the role of unions and what a struggle it took to create an independent party in the late 1950s, early 1960s. And Poilievre is marketing his brand of conservatism as being against big business and for the working class. He's lying, and he's lying. But
wasn't
he
that
says,
wasn't that how your current premier Thug Ford did
yeah,
he kind of run on that too?
yeah, and he's running on it again.
While also playing footsie with the socially regressive far rights.
Yeah, yeah, and Thug Ford, we call him lovingly Thug Ford. Doug Ford is doing the same. He's campaigning now, and when he's caught lying and cheating and stealing, as he is with his friends in the development industry who were given promises of land purchases where highways would be built through farmland. Ford backed away when it was discovered that this was malfeasance writ large. He then calls a news conference and said, I'm going to be honest with you. I made a mistake. I'm not perfect, but I admit my mistakes, unlike some others. And we're going to do better. We're going to build houses everywhere we can. That means even on farmland. We're going to ease the transportation crunch. We're going to build, Highway 311 through farmland. We're going to pay attention to what the people want, because we are a people's party. Well, liar, liar. But what we need is.
But that being said, Barry, do you, in the circles you're in, and when you interact with with fellow NDPers, but they may not be part of NDP Socialist Caucus, Wham, and so forth, are a lot of them still saying that we need to engage in tactical voting, and because of the boogeyman that's Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives making a huge comeback? So hold our nose, vote for a Liberal over here, vote for NDP over here, and look at what the Liberals and the NDP gave us. They gave us the building blocks to a Pharmacare dental care program.
Right. Well, you prefaced your question by asking whether people in our circle, whether they're members of the Socialist Caucus or not, but people with whom we associate and militate and organize and demonstrate. And the answer is no. Those folks are not making that facile mistake. But millions of others are making that mistake. And we need to address them. Now, they cannot be successfully, effectively addressed by simply saying the NDP has to move 3 millimeters to the left. What we need is for the NDP and the labor movement. The labor movement encompasses, 3 million workers. The NDP election base is 2.5 million. It's a little bit larger than Socialist Action, just a wee bit. So, we need them to show leadership, and we challenge them to show leadership. We're not indifferent to their sellouts. And we say that when Pierre Poilievre says that he's for the working class, that he's against the carbon tax, it's good that Jagmeet Singh says, under pressure from us in a minor way, and from some unions and provincial governments and others, when Jagmeet Singh says, we're really not in favor of relying on a carbon tax. It is regressive. It punishes consumers. We need to tax the rich. We need to tax the big polluters. We need to tax the oil and gas industry and stop giving them, depletion allowances and subsidies and promotional money to build more wells and more pipelines. We have to break with that because time is running short. The earth may not survive it, and us with it. So that it's good. But then the very next day, after Jagmeet said he's more or less opposed to the carbon tax, in which he is basically adapting to public opinion polls and trying to undercut Pierre Poilievre, the very next day, a spokesperson for the NDP in the energy portfolio says, well, we're not against the carbon tax. We just would like a combination of taxes. That's a killer. That's a killer. Pierre Poilievre will say, see, I told you. So the answer is to say, we are anti-capitalist. Pierre Poilievre is not. Yes, he says he's against the establishment, but you know something, friends? He is the friggin' establishment.
Exactly.
He represents the establishment agenda even more than Justin Trudeau does. He wants to outlaw strikes and legalize scabbing. He's going to undo the federal legislation that was just adopted under tremendous pressure from the Public Service Alliance and NDP. That's gonzo. If Pierre comes to government power. So we need an anti-capitalist NDP and labor movement. And, well, even better would be a Socialist Action mass party, which fights for these things the way the communists in Canada did in the mid-1920s, under the fresh influence of the Russian Revolution and before Stalinist betrayal and degeneration of proletarian democracy. That's what we need. And, they say history repeats itself. I'm hoping that we can see that militant labor unionism, class struggle policies, alliances of tenants and seniors and women and Indigenous people with a radical labor movement and an NDP that's forced to the left until decisively we can break away tens of thousands of people from it and constitute a mass revolutionary party. That's what is needed in order to change the configuration that has us on the road to destruction now. We can do better and we shall do better, but we have to understand the Liberals are in serious trouble. Pierre Poilievre has captured the populist sentiment. We need to strip him of that.
Fake populist segments. I have to.
Yeah, of course it is. Of course it. But all populism suffers from the same defect. It's not class. It says we're against the big, we are the little guys. Populism is not class clear. We need working class revolutionary politics, not populist politics, because populism fades too easily into the corporate agenda.
Interesting. I think. Well, I'll respectfully disagree with you on that, and people should go read Thomas Frank's book about the Populist Party. Okay, Barry, I have to squeeze two questions. I have to squeeze two questions out of you before time is done.
You'll have to be a magician.
Okay, and my two very quick questions are this: your thoughts on Charlie Angus, Randall Garrison, and others of the NDP not running for re-election. And to those who still reject the NDP, even reject the NDP as a protest vote, would you say to those who were supportive of a Dimitri Lascaris, or those who say they're going to vote for Communist Party of Canada in their writing. Would you say to them that it's better that they advocate for very strong radical left policies, but push that through the NDP and their local unions and whatnot?
Yes, I would say pretty much what you just did. The Green Party is a capitalist party. Um, the leader of the Green Party in Parliament, Elizabeth May, um, is 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 voting for the Liberal war budget. Um, she's for NATO backing Ukraine and the NATO war against Russia. Now we don't support either side in that ugly war, and Putin wants to recreate the Tsarist Empire, and too many Stalinists and left populists back Russia and also back China in its nefarious activities around the world and at home. It's slave labor.
Might even have to respectfully disagree with you on that, but we're going to save that debate for another day.
Yeah, but in any case, the Green Party is a graveyard for progressive politics and working class politics. I think Dimitri demonstrated that there's an appetite for radical policies in that party, but that's all. What he did simply kept that party going, and that party should disappear, as should the Liberals, the Conservatives, the People's Party of Canada, and make way for a working class revolution. But no, the Green Party offers no future. The NDP is where part of the fight takes place. Now, if give you maybe to some viewers a counterintuitive example. If the Palestine Solidarity Movement had confined itself to the NDP, that would have been a huge mistake, because when the war between the Zionist apartheid state and the people of Gaza broke out after October 7th, mention of the word Palestine in the NDP, you would have heard your own echo. No applause. It's different now. But what was the source of the difference maker in practical politics? Mass action in the streets. So that's where we put our emphasis. Mass action in the streets to end the occupation, to allow the refugees, the people who were forced out of their homes in 48 and 56 and 67 to go home. For a democratic, secular Palestine, and the genocide.
And a democratic, secular one-state solution.
One state, not two. But unfortunately, the Communist Party of Canada supports a two-state solution. The Communist Party of Canada backs the decision by Joseph Stalin at the UN in 1947 to vote to create the apartheid state of Israel. Yes, they voted for it in the United Nations.
Okay, yeah, I understand that, but...
And the Stalinists still back the two-state solution. Yes, you check their policy. It's crystal clear. They call for the establishment of a Palestinian state on the West Bank and Gaza, not for a one-state solution, not even as a transition to a one-state solution. Among the Palestinians on the West Bank and Gaza, there's less than 20% support for a two-state solution. They realize there's no way that they can live in peace with social justice side by side the apartheid nuclear power known as Zionist Israel. And yet the Stalinists still support that wretched, discredited perspective. So we need to be clear. The Green Party is no alternative. CPCML, they suffer the same.
But long story short, I just was asking that if you think people who are members of Marxist-Leninist organizations like the Communist Party of Canada, instead of using whatever limited resources they have in running for elections, be strong advocates and push that the NDP and unions, their local unions and federal unions, be more, revolutionary.
Yeah, well, they should do that. But guess what? They've never done it. Never. Not even for one election. They've never said, we urge a critical support for the NDP and we ask the unions that we influence or in which we are present to do the same. They've never done it. their policy is for what they call advanced democracy. It's an alliance with the liberal bourgeoisie to make Canada independent of the US empire and to support progressive politics, what you would call left populist politics, which we reject completely. It's the graveyard of working class politics. It's absolute destruction, more apparent in the United States, but potentially pernicious in Canada as well. Now, you mentioned Charlie Angus. Charlie Angus is not seeking re-election in his district, which is Timmins North, and likewise Carol Hughes is not running north of Thunder Bay, and Rachel Blaney is not running in British Columbia, central British Columbia. And you mentioned
Randall Garrison.
I'm so happy he's not running. Randall Garrison is the most pro-Zionist member of Parliament, bar none. Even more than the wretched, the liberal House Father, who objected to the watered down NDP motion calling for a ceasefire and no arms trade with Israel, and the Liberals, cooperated with that after watering down the resolution. The Green Party didn't initiate a resolution like that, and no other party did. At least the NDP did. And why? Because the NDP is more susceptible to that pressure. So yes, the parties of the left, large and small, should give critical support to the NDP, and more importantly, they should join the Socialist Caucus, or if they don't want to join it, they should form something like that and fight for their ideas, not my ideas, their ideas. Let's be democratic. They should fight for their own ideas in the unions and in the NDP to push for a workers' agenda. Now, these Stalinist parties, they don't go very far. They are basically left liberal in terms of their strategic outlook, but let them go as far as they can go and not run against the NDP, even though, a typical, Stalinist candidate will locally get 50 to 100 votes. They're not getting 10, 20, 30, 40,000 votes. So, we're discussing a marginal result. And that's why it's a waste of time on their part. And it's not even a distraction for the working class because nobody notices these campaigns whatsoever. They have zero impact. To the extent that anyone notices them, they're repulsed by them. So what we need is class struggle politics organized in bodies like the Workers' Action Movement in the unions and Socialist Action across the society, this entire social landscape, and the Socialist Caucus and the NDP. That's what we need if we're going to break the present matrix. And why is Charlie Angus not running? Because the districts have been reconfigured. I don't know if you heard.
Isn't that isn't that basically like gerrymandering?
Well, sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. In this case, I think it is. But he said that he wants to spend more time with his family. I mean, every politician says the same thing, and often it's true. I don't know if it is. I can't read his mind, but I know he's a difficult person to get along with. He never cooperated with the NDP left. He tried to position himself as like the bare-fisted fighter. And he did,
and the best friend to Indigenous Canadians.
And I'll give him credit for some of that. He did do some good work for Indigenous peoples and their rights, but he's not fighting for an anti-capitalist solution, for a workers' agenda, for restitution before reconciliation. Our slogan. There has to be restitution before reconciliation is meaningful in any real sense, and that means returning the resource corporations to the common good, to the commonwealth, and let workers and Indigenous people decide how to wind them up and how to transfer that stolen wealth to green, sustainable sources of energy and other developments, so that all Indigenous people can have drinking water in their home communities. That's that. So he's not running because I think he would face a challenge from the Conservatives. The others I mentioned, I don't know whether Carol Hughes and Rachel Blaney face a strong challenge. But usually these are in resource towns. The Liberals are not strong. It's basically an NDP conservative race. And if the NDPer who's an incumbent is not running, that tells you something. That tells you something. That they're worried about a big Tory majority in which the NDP will be reduced to 10 or 15 seats, and the Liberals likewise, and Pierre Poilievre will become, a version of Trump, a version of the Canadian dictator. It's an ugly prospect, but to take it, to see it in a brighter light, maybe it will trigger a radicalization, because the working class organizations have not been destroyed by fascism. We still have millions of members of unions. We still have, millions of people voting for the NDP, and over 100,000 members of it. So these organizations are still intact. Tenants unions are still intact. The environmental movement is still intact. Indigenous organizations are as well. So there's a capacity to fight back against a more radical majority government. I'm not saying if the better it is, the worse the conditions are. No, I'm not I'm for better conditions, because that gives people the confidence to fight for more. But sometimes
better conditions, if you don't mind my interrupting, better conditions is voting for the NDP, at least as a protest vote, not tactical voting and allowing, the Liberals and the Conservatives to, politically match fix all of us.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm not a big pollster, but the closer the NDP gets to surpassing the Liberal Party in polls, the less likely there will be an argument by anybody in favor of lesser evil voting tactics. So the sooner that happens, the better. If we have a two-party system, the NDP and the Conservatives, there's a better chance that we'll get a working class government. Not that the NDP represents a workers' agenda, no, but there's a chance that there's a space where we can expand our protests into a viable, radical political alternative to the status quo. And for that, we strive.
Well, we were joined on this edition of 1+1 with Barry Weisleder, who is a leading member of the NDP Socialist Caucus, Socialist Action Canada, and the Workers' Alliance movement. I will make sure to link to all of those, and people should check them out. And apparently, they now have a new journalism project called the Red Review. And if you are a member of the Communist Party of Canada or a spokesperson of theirs, and you want to respond to any of the criticisms Barry made, please, you can contact me, Yuri Smouter, at gmail.com. Barry, thank you so much for coming on the program. I look forward to talking to you again whenever a general election comes out. And also, I know somebody who wants to people have been wanting a debate on whether to reform the NDP or completely abandon it and go for either a new left party or an already existing left party like the Communist Party of Canada. And I found somebody who is willing to take that challenge. So an open invite to you that we, do that sometime in the future. Okay.
My pleasure. And by the way, Sarah
Yes.
Jama, who was booted out of the NDP caucus in the Ontario legislature because she called for a ceasefire without criticizing in the same breath Hamas. She is an independent member of the legislature, and we are not bound to the NDP. We're supporting her re-election in Hamilton Centre. So our politics are tactically flexible, and that includes supporting radicals who are deprived of their rights in the labor-based NDP. We have a panoply of tactics, and we invite people to get in touch with us at www.socialistaction.ca. Subscribe to the Red Review. Send me the link for this, and we'll share it with thousands of people on our e-list. Yuri, great pleasure talking with you.
Likewise.
I hope the weather is nice in Belgium today.
It's cold, but it's nice. But it's nice sunny weather at the moment, and that's much better than rainy weather. So until then, Barry,
all the best to you.
Likewise. Ciao until then.